This is Fintech Chatter, presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. And I'm your host, Dexter Cousins. In this episode, I'm joined by Stephen McNulty, Chief Growth Officer of Haventec. Founded in Australia in 2014 by Rick Richardson and Tony Castagna, Haventec's vision is to enable open enterprise without the risk of maintaining large stores of sensitive data. Haventec protects digital identities from harm through their Authenticate platform and keeps important data safe through their Sanctum platform. I want to tell you about a fantastic opportunity we have for a head of operations. Tier 1 People is proudly partnering with one of Australia's most successful fintech. An innovator in the consumer lending space, this business has been a driving force in fintech for almost a decade. Still founder-led, the strategy has been executed impeccably so far, and now is the right time for the next stage of hypergrowth. As head of lending operations, play a pivotal role in this next exciting phase. Working with the executive team, you'll get to transform the business from startup to enterprise. If innovation, process excellence, and technology is your passion, then this could be the dream opportunity. For further details, reach out to me on LinkedIn or contact info@tier1people.com. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thank you, Dexter.
Good to have you here. Could you tell our listeners a little bit more about Haventec?
Sure. Haventec has been around maybe a little bit longer than people might expect. The company was founded in 2014, 2015 to answer what has become quite a prescient question, which is, can you truly be private on the internet? And how can companies protect both their employees or their customers from nefarious activity, both internal and external to the company? And so a number of inventions were created and patented globally. The platform was built over a 4-year period, validated over an additional 15, 16-month period. And for the last 6 months or so, we've been commercializing the platform and rolling it out to a number of customers in Australia, and we're about to roll out to the US. So it's been a fast commercialization journey off the back of an investment made in answering a very important question.
So how did the idea for Haventec come about?
So we're very fortunate. Our co-founders are people of real import. So Tony Castagna is co-founder, also co-founder of Nuix, which IPO'd back in the end of 2020 very successfully. And that's a company that believes in the power of data. They would often be called in to be the discovery engine for a situation like a breach or a nefarious activity where a company needs help. And in that, there's a number of data points that grew up over time, including not just an opinion, a fact that most data breaches were instigated internally, either through a blunder or through a nefarious employee or activity. And the question was ruminating in Tony's mind, and he talked to a guy called Rick Richardson that he met at a luncheon. And Rick turns out to be an even more fascinating character in some respects, because he's the opposite of Tony. Where Tony is a commercializer, someone who has many successful startups to his name. Rick is an inventor, and he cares about ideas. And he took 6 key concepts, created 6 patents, which were globally lodged and are the basis for the technology. And Rick will often talk about his mindset, which is the reason why the accessibility piece is so front and center. He wanted to design a privacy solution that his parents could use. And I found that conversation with Rick to be a really compelling one when I made the decision to join the company.
And in terms of I guess, the business and where it's at today.
Well, we've got about 20 people in New South Wales, in Queensland, and in Oregon, in the west coast of the US. We've 10 clients, all headquartered in Australia, but many of them with global ops. What we're finding, at least in this initial commercialization phase, is if you're an organization that's regulated, that the opportunity to remove the honeypot that is the username and password is a compelling one. That's our Authenticate product. The Sanctum product is the equivalent, but looking at sensitive data and eradicating the risk of theft of that sensitive data. So where you have organizations that are regulated, organizations that are running digital channels that require a compelling user experience, those types of organizations have leapt at Haventec as a first in the first wave of commercialization. But there are more and more interesting cases where organizations are getting their head around what we do and the opportunity that affords them that traditional technologies just do not.
Yeah. And so you 86400 are one of your clients that some of our listeners might be aware of. Are there any other kind of fintechs that you've been working with?
So there's a number of fintechs. So the nature of digital privacy and security is that unless an organization talks publicly about us, we can't talk publicly about them. But there are 4 financial institutions in Australia right now that are using our technology to protect their employees and their customers. 86400 is a really good example, though, because they have spoken about us in terms of building out their platform. They invested in Australian fintech, which I think is a really important aspect of the success story of 86400. They went out of their way to take investment opportunity to companies like Haventec, and I really believe that's part of their success. But what we do for 86400 is we provide their digital identity for their users, and that allows them to run really world-leading onboarding activities. I spoke to a number of fintechs and banks in the UK just last week, and we were explaining how 86400 use our technology to create a transacting banking customer from an anonymous digital user in less than 2 minutes. There was silence on the call as those organizations contemplated that in their institution, and many of them are nowhere near that. In Australia, often you have to go through a call center in order to be a transacting customer. So that digital identity, that know your customer, that onboarding experience facilitated by Haventec really helps 86400 to give some ballast to what I'm describing. 86400's most recent net promoter score, NPS, was 47.4, compared to pretty much an industry average of around 2.
Yeah.
So coming back to that original point, you get digital privacy right, you get the experience of using your product in an elegant way, and it is phenomenally good for business.
Yeah. Well, I was on hold to my bank for 3 hours, I think, last week. So I'm all for digital ID.
Well, digital ID isn't a concept that's going away anytime soon. In fact, the evolution of digital ID into biometrics and other combinations of what you know and what organizations have about you, that evolution is continuing apace. I mean, we've seen fingerprints, we've seen obviously Face ID, but we're not a long way away from iris prints and voice prints, but also getting right into DNA sequencing and other aspects of biometrics, which will create a new paradigm for the humble digital identity. It's going to be an amazing couple of years thinking about these concepts.
Yeah, and I've been at pains to, especially the risk and compliance community, who believe that, they're never going to be replaced by AI and technology, because of things like fraud and KYC. Well, AI and technology will actually prevent fraud, not let it happen in the first place.
The predictive quality of AI is obviously of interest to everything that most financial institutions worry about. But there's, quantum computing is going to open up a lot of opportunity. It also opens up a lot of risk in terms of what may be considered secure and private now may not be so in a relatively short time frame. And you mentioned regulatory influence. What's happening in Europe with the regulatory environment there is slowly but surely becoming the norm here. And thankfully, it's giving companies an opportunity to prepare, at least those with foresight. So those that think about their crown jewels being their digital identities and the sensitive data that they use to run their business, and they go about making sure that is secure and cannot be stolen. Those are organizations that are listening to the runes, because it's coming, and it's coming fast, and rightfully so, because the situation where we wake up every morning and see the latest breach on TV is untenable, or in the newspapers. And so it's about time that we got our act together around these things.
Yeah. And if we look at the banking industry here, 3 chief execs of the big 4 banks have lost their jobs around issues like this. So it's fundamental, to the health of the banking system here in Oz that we get this right.
And once you're aware that there's a technology product out there that eliminates the use of usernames and passwords, which may or may not have been an issue for you in the past, once you're aware that can and should be effectively eliminated, not that it can be, but that username and password is a decade-old technology, there is no need for it. Haventec allows you to be more secure than multi-factor authentication, whilst eliminating completely the need to have a username and password. Now, I haven't had a conversation with a CIO yet where when I say that to them, they haven't lent a little bit into me and said, tell me more. And now, if you're a board and you have a regulatory risk around data or around these identities, you should be leaning ever more forward, because this is the mechanism by which that you can deal with those concerns. And it's driven out of a fintech here in Australia, globally patented. And I'm sat here because that is a situation that doesn't come around very often, and it's a truly exciting one. And it's so brilliant to see an organization, 86400, who bet on us early on, bet on our technology. We worked as closely with them as I've ever worked with an organization, and look at the journey that they're on. And so we want to see more organizations in Australia taking that leap.
Awesome. Now we're going to take a quick break whilst I plug something that's happening in our business. When we come back, I'm going to ask you for a favor. So my boy Harry is our youngest listener at the age of 8, and he listens to this podcast when he goes to sleep at night. And I thought, what better way to educate my boy than to have incredible people like yourself share with him your top tip for fintech success. So we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, if you want to give Harry a top tip, that would be great.
I'll try my best.
Banking is at a crossroads, facing a difficult road ahead. COVID has shown how inadequate legacy systems are. Most bank processes have not changed in 50 years, and this is your opportunity to bring banks into the digital age and provide futuristic customer experiences. Our client is a digital transformation consultancy working with world-leading brands. The banking and financial services practice is the fastest growing in the group, and they're on the hunt for a country managing director to launch and scale the APAC region here from Sydney. We're looking for someone to develop award-winning digital experiences for digital challenger banks and mid-tier banks. We're looking for someone with deep domain experience in banking and lending technology. Ideally, you'll be coming from a recognized digital consultancy or an enterprise banking software player. If that's you, we'd love to hear from you. So check out my LinkedIn profile for further details. Well, welcome back to the show, Stephen.
Hi, thank you.
So what's your big tip for Harry?
Gosh, this is the question that I've been most nervous about. I have an 8-year-old as well. His name's Finbar, and
hey Finbar, if you're listening,
he will absolutely be listening. And I'm gonna kind of raise the bar a little bit for you, Dexter, because I published my first podcast last week, Haven Talk.
Congrats.
By Haventec. It's a podcast about digital privacy. And in episode 1, there were 2 guests. One is Rick Richardson, the most prolific inventor in Australian history, who's co-founder of Haventec. I mentioned him earlier. The second was Finbar.
Awesome.
He makes not 1 but 2 appearances on the podcast. In terms of a specific tip for Harry, it's interesting. I'm pretty new to the world of startups and fintech, but the ethos that stuck with me so far is one that came from our co-founder Tony Castagna, and he will often talk to us about the power of the idea being the kind of the fundamental of a successful startup and any successful fintech. Next comes the people, and third, and rightfully third, is the funding. So let's talk about the people. The people side of things, what Tony has impressed upon me, and it's something that I'll remember, is that the team who've built Haventec have the same ownership as anyone who's invested in the funding. That means there is complete equitability and recognition of the importance of the people and the team. This is where the real value lives. So I would say to Harry, as I said to Finbar, is that always believe and look after your team.
That's great to hear, because that's actually one of the qualities or values that we have as a family as well. So you've got an interesting background. Can you share a little bit more about that with our listeners?
I went to university, engineering background, and I spent my first years as an engineer for Ford Motor Company and for a Japanese electronics company called TDK Electronics.
Used to use the tapes all the time.
That's right. Everyone did. And that was also part of what intrigued me, because I had, at the same time, I was writing for a music magazine, and I had a bunch of stuff going on in university around a radio show, and I had this love of the arts, and so that tickled me. So I ended up doing some work in Dusseldorf and in Tokyo, and that led me to a company at the time called Anderson Consulting. And so I spent in 4 different countries, about 7 or 8 years with those guys, before moving to Australia in 2006. So I'll be in Australia 15 years this year, which is amazing, because I came here for 1 year. But the last little while has been leading a sales organization in a consulting firm called Avanade, becoming the country manager of Apple Enterprise, and for the last 6 months being the growth officer of Haventec.
So Apple, I guess, very famously, you've gone the privacy route. What did you kind of pick up from your time at Apple that you've been able to put into Haventec?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I suspect there'll be one very obvious element, and then maybe one that surprised me, maybe as well as other people. And the obvious one is the privacy aspect of how Apple think about their technology. The very first slide I saw in my career in Apple was a slide that said, privacy is a fundamental human right. And every day that I was there, that concept was built into the technology, the software, the ethos of the company. And so it was impossible not to have that imprinted on you whilst working at Apple. The other one, though, was a surprise and delight feature for me. So there was a member of a team called the Initiatives team. Her name was Jessica, and she believed and passionately held forth that accessibility and inclusivity was as important a value as any other. And when I spent time with her, we ended up inviting Jessica to come to speak to all of our enterprise customers. And this became a tour that was sold out. It was like, standing room only in these organizations, as Jessica would describe how it was possible to design technology thinking about the edge cases, thinking about the people who would be using the technology in very unique ways. If you're a paraplegic and you can only move your left eyebrow, you can use an iPad. And I found that inspiring. I would often find HR leaders, in particular, program directors, leaving those events inspired around how to think about their hardware and effectively their software in new ways. It was one of the more complete selling messages, because not only are you saying that the investment makes sense because there's a ecosystem that is second to none globally, but also that you're including those who are maybe less advantaged than you are. And so from a values perspective, that really struck with me.
So you spent a couple of years at Apple. There's been a lot of talk, more than talk. We've seen, the destructive kind of impacts that big tech can have on society. What role do you see big tech playing, especially as we kind of move into this hyper digital world? We're definitely now in the digital age. Even though we're still kind of dragging on, I think this, as you alluded to, this next few years, I think are going to be massively disruptive. So what role do you see big tech playing in the privacy space?
Well, any large organization that fundamentally cares about the experience of their customers and the experience of their employees must put privacy right in the middle of that. As I've said, that is good for business. There are other types of organization, though, larger companies, large influential organizations like government departments and others, that need to stand up and be counted when it comes to backing local innovation. Yeah. Because you only become relevant to an organization like Apple or PayPal or Microsoft, etc., once there's a legacy that you can point to. And often that legacy is a hard thing to build in that initial commercialization stage. And so you look for support. So you get support from your network. You often get support from the other network of fintechs that you're involved in who find ways to come together. You get support from companies like 86400 who place their faith in you. You get support from the government, things like the New South Wales Go Global program, which we're part of. They're supporting our move to the UK, connecting us with qualified opportunities. Things that would be incredibly hard for us to do at our early stage and our small size. All of those things make you credible, such that when you get the opportunity to talk to a Microsoft or to a PayPal or an Apple, you have that credibility and that legacy that gives you those listening moments that I spoke to earlier. So, the power of a good idea will always compel in large organizations, and I've been on the other side listening to people talking to me. But when they tick those boxes, that's when I really listened. And so there's support that's needed for organizations like Haventec, and support that we can give others in helping them on their journey, and that will make the difference.
Now, we've talked a little bit about the financial services industry, and if there's an industry that I see kind of ripe for disruption, I don't think it's happened yet. It is financial services. And I base that just on my own personal experiences as a customer, where everything is still, it's kind of, even the digital processes seem to be built for an analog world. I have to fill in forms. I have to, scan stuff, email it across. It's, we've replaced fax with email. And I'm keen to get your take on where you see digital ID, being able to disrupt financial services, and what some of the risks are that that might be immediate.
Well, immediate risks are the lack of trust that happens when breach occurs. So here in New South Wales, we've had some examples with our own state government in recent times where significant personal data has been stolen. In time, those trust implications will become financial, and the penalties for not taking care, due and diligence are starting to really become punitive. We've seen hundreds of millions of dollars of fines handed out to companies like British Airways and others in the Northern Hemisphere. So you've mentioned the personal cost of senior folk losing their jobs. You also see it in the scores that financial services providers get in terms of NPS, and you're increasingly going to see it in the regulatory hammer coming down. So this is an important time to take pause and to think about how you are caring for the things that are important to you and that have consequence if they're lost. And so I re-emphasize that this is not a simple solution. It's not a simple, one size. You can just deal with this in time. You must plan and prepare for it. Do your due diligence, look at what's out there, and prepare for what's coming. And looking at organizations like Haventec, 86400 and others, they should give you confidence that there are better answers, and that the traditional build a castle surrounded by a moat, build the walls higher and higher, that just invites warfare. It invites nefarious activity. More creatively about these things and give organizations like Haventec a good listening to, because those who do are on the vanguard and will move forward.
Cool. So other than Haventec, which fintech's got you most excited right now?
There's an organization that I really like. They're not particularly new, but I think it's the type of organization or type of idea that appeals to me. And that organization is Spaceship. They have very direct products. They aim their investment products at maybe the younger demographic, and they get them excited about what it means to be in a high growth investment, or to see the impact of what a good superannuation growth plan can do, and to surface those ideas in a way that are really consumable and really actionable. And I think that fintech can take lessons from companies like that. Haventec, we aim to eliminate usernames and passwords. Spaceship aims to make it exciting to have a superannuation portfolio. The fintechs that find a way to grab me with an idea that is both simple and powerful, those are the fintechs that are going to appeal to me, and will often get the traction within those larger tech organizations that I spoke about earlier.
So we're going to wrap up, Stephen. But what can we expect from Haventec in the next 12 months?
Well, I think maybe the project that I'm most looking forward to talking about later in the year, Dexter, is what we're doing with AustCyber, the Australian Cyber Authority, part of the federal government, and a genetics company called 23 Strands. I mentioned earlier biometrics and where digital IDs and in consequence digital data or high sensitivity data will go. And this is a project that we're tackling head on. So there's a new word that's become part of my lexicon over the last couple of months. That word is immutable. If you have your DNA sequenced, that is an immutable thing. It will not change in time. So unlike a credit card or a password, if you've had those stolen at some point or breached, you can get new ones and deal with the consequences. But if someone steals your DNA sequence, that is an immutable thing. It cannot be undone. And it might even be an intergenerational issue. That has implications through the generations. So for me, that means that if those types of biometric measures are going to become part of what might be used to identify me, I'm thinking about those organizations that have that data in a different way. So we're working with a company called 23 Strands, and they asked us to solve a problem, which is, what if a citizen or a customer has their DNA sequence and wants to share that with a health organization on their health journey, and at some point revoke that consent? Is that possible? And with our technology, it is. Because the technology, or the vault that stores your DNA sequence, remains with the citizen or the customer. And the health company or the health practitioners do not need to take responsibility for storing that data. Now, I believe in a world of open banking and open utilities, and where we're going with health, that concept of consent and revoke for sensitive data will become an incredibly important one. And we're right at the epicenter of that with the Australian government. We hope to announce our findings on this toward the middle of this year. And rounding out, why does a Haventec matter? Well, it matters because we will be able to, in time, allow customers the luxury of sharing the data that they care about and revoking it if they don't want to have that organization part of their plan going forward. Now, think about that.
Fantastic.
That is something that really gets the hackles on my neck, raised, and I can't wait to talk about that more publicly.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Stephen. Where can people find out more about Haventec?
Well, website, haventec.com, haventec.com, or through me, Stephen McNulty, at LinkedIn. And I mentioned our podcast earlier. That's Haven Talk by Haventec. And you can find that podcast at Haventalk, Haven Talk, TALK, all one word, .buzzsprout.com. You can subscribe then on any platform that you choose.
Fantastic.
And hopefully you'll find it as entertaining as we find it putting it together. We've had great feedback on it. So Dexter's very kindly giving me some advice as well, which is wonderful. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter as Dexter Cousins. You can also now follow the Tier 1 People page on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Fintech Chatter LinkedIn newsletter. Thanks for listening. If you liked today's show, please hit subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps me bring on great guests like Stephen. This show is presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. We'll help you launch, scale, and innovate by delivering world-class talent. And you can reach us, info@tier1people.com. Until the next episode, stay safe